Welcome everyone to another video, and in this video this particular trainer wanted me actually give them feedback on their battles. Let me know how they can improve. I believe they're around the ace range in terms of elo. Their team consists of Shadow Machamp, let me zoom here a little bit, Shadow Machamp, Alolan Muck with Poison Jab, Dark Pulse, and Sledge Wave. They're also running Rock Slide instead of Payback on Shadow Machamp, and then with Jellicent. What I like to do whenever I discuss with people in terms of how they can improve is first take a look at their team. Obviously people can climb with various teams and figure out ways, and the most important thing is to figure out how to play with the teams, but it's also important to evaluate the team to see if there are any common weaknesses, maybe changes, substitutions you can make. So pretty solid team. Machamp obviously weak to ghost types, so it's very nice having a Alolan Mug. Weak to Charm, which is also very nice having a Alolan Mug. But Shadow Machamp is also very strong against two things that are very good, or things that are very good against the backline. So, for example, Registeel is very strong against the backline. Machamp counters it, so it's not too bad of a team. And we can see in PV Poke that it reflects this as well, with the coverage being B, the bulk being C, safety being C, which means there's not really super strong safe switches here, and consistency being A. A lot of that has to do with counter fast move damage along with the poison jab damage. Jellicent can be a little bit baity but in that situation. When we take a look at the team compared to the meta scorecard, we can see it does pretty decent against the meta. Probably the biggest concerns, in my opinion, even though it doesn't necessarily reflect this in the scorecard, is Pokemon like Pidgeot in the lead, where it is able to deal super effective damage and resist Jellicent's Hex and Shadow Ball damage. Giratina Altered would also be quite challenging because it does have it has a very good matchup against Shadow Machamp, and then has a decent matchup against Jellicent, has a very poor matchup against Giratina. Another Pokemon is like Gliscor. Gliscor would give this entire team a problem, especially on the switch in. Would be very difficult to deal with. But you can see down here some potential threats. You want to make sure that the potential threats are not like really common meta Pokemon. Obviously, if people are running like Arungaregus, then that's like more of an obscure Pokemon that you're unlikely to run against. And if you do, you don't really fuss too much about it because you're not going to run to Arungaregus in every single game. Dragalge is the same thing, not too common a Pokemon, though I think it's quite strong. It's not too common a Pokemon. Crobat is another one. Even though it does counter all three Pokemon, the Surgery is not too worrisome. Along with Swampert, Swampert does have a pretty good matchup against, has a very good matchup against Alolan Mug. Losing matchup against Jellicent, though it's still, in my opinion, a neutral matchup. And then a slightly positive matchup against Machamp, which is not too concerning because you can put it pretty low. Virizion, same thing, but Shadow Machamp can probably do quite a bit of damage versus it, so not too concerned. Gliscor and Pidgeot would be the two Pokemon that I would be personally most worried about. But let's go ahead and take a look at the battles, and then I might be pausing these battles. I'll try to showcase them as I normally do, but I will pause them on some things that I think they can improve upon. So let's go ahead and get started. So we have Shadow Machamp into Walrein. This is an extremely positive lead. Well, okay, a positive lead because you are dealing super effective damage with counter and cross chop while taking neutral damage from the powder snows and icicle spears. They will hurt quite a bit because Shadow Machamp is still quite glassy in the Ultra League, but is still able to endure and land a cross chop and counter down the Walrein. So that's not too concerning. Another thing that you want to note when you have a very positive lead like this is like, how does your backline deal with it? Do you have to switch out if they switch out? In this case, the answer is no, because you have another strong answer in the form of Jellicent, because Jellicent resists the Powder Snows, resists the Icicle Spear, and they will have to go with a neutral Earthquake, which has no same type attack bonus, which does make it a little bit less effective move. Still does a pretty decent amount. And then Jellicent, as well as is dealing neutral damage with the Hex and Shadow Ball. And then Alolan Muck has probably the worst matchup against Walrein, but it's still a pretty neutral matchup. If they land the Earthquake, it will do quite a bit of damage. It won't one-shot because it is not a shadow, so a Lonely Muck can survive one. But something to consider is that you don't have to switch out if they do switch. Obviously, you should if the matchup is bad for Shadow Machamp, but that's something you want to think about, especially if they have a core breaker in the back. So the opponent switches out and they switch out into Giratina. This trainer is a little bit slow on the switch. They go up to 5 counters and they bank the cross chop, but you take a decent amount of damage from the Shadow Claws on Giratina, and then you switch out into a Lonely Muck. You still will have to land 2 Dark Pulses, so I don't like being so far behind on energy, but this is still should be okay because you do resist the Shadow Claws with a Lonely Muck and still able to handle this matchup pretty okay. But you catch the Dragon Claw, they were going to throw the Dragon Claw regardless, but banking the cross chop is not that bad of a situation. So again, you're going to have to land 2 Dark Pulses against this Giratina in order to take it out. But switch is also not necessary because you will. This trainer threw on. They threw on CMP on the next one. Oh no, they threw one short of the CMP, so they did 4. And as you can see, the Giratina does survive the 1 Dark Pulse, and the Poison Jabs are resisted, so you will have to throw again, and they will throw on CMP because it is 5 Shadow Claws for the first one, 4 for the second one, and then it alternates because 9 Shadow Claws results in 72 energy. And each Dragon Claw is 35, so times it by 2 is 70. So unless you do a ton of them, you won't have any of that. So it goes 5 4 5 4 basically for quite a while. Anyways, they do not shield, which makes sense. In this scenario here, it's also not necessary. There's a couple things to consider. One is you could, because if they come wall running, you could immediately pivot to Jellicent because you know that you don't want to get farmed down with Alolan Muck, and you know that Jellicent handles wall running quite well, and so does Shadow Machamp. But something to consider is that, but you could also stay, force them to throw or force them to farm down, and they do allow the Dark Pulse to come through onto the Muck, and they do end up shielding. In this case, not throwing right away is interesting play there because the Wall Rain does have the energy to land the Icicle Spear. So they could have thrown the Icicle Spear then switched. But this is an okay play to do the 1 counter just in case they try to switch out right away. So they are going to throw up the shield. Likely the Wall Rain will make it to another move. Okay. Oh, very nice catch onto the Jellicent, which is very nice. Obviously down a shield at this point in time, and the opponent not down a shield, they're even shields because they shielded the Dark Pulse. So looking back on their first match, I would have liked to see the switch a little bit faster to Alolan Muck to reduce the Shadow Claw damage onto Machamp, and I potentially would have liked to see the pivot straight to Jellicent rather than letting it farm down, just in case you need the Muck for something else, like a Trevenant, for example, would have been something that would have been helpful to have the little Muck, even at that low health. So we see Shadow Machamp into Charizard. This matchup is really bait dependent. They are going to deal super effective damage with the wing attacks. It is not a shadow one, so the fast move pressure is not as great. But Shadow Machamp is pretty glassy, so it does take super effective damage from the wing attacks. It does take 7 wing attacks, I should say, to make it to the first blast burn, 6 for the second one. But they can opt to bait with the Dragon Claw, which would still do about 20-30% damage to Shadow Machamp. So this becomes a very tricky matchup. Jellicent has a strong matchup versus Charizard since it does resist the Blast Burn, still taking neutral damage from the wing attacks. The Blast Burn is actually more energy efficient than the Dragon Claw, just because that's how powerful Dragon Claw is and how weak of a move Dragon Claw. How powerful move Blast Burn is, and Dragon Claw is quite a weak move with no same type attack bonus. And then Alolan Muck has a pretty neutral matchup. It does slightly favor the Charizard especially with no acid spray, because of the ability to generate energy really quickly in the blast burn. Wouldn't one shot, but would put the Alolan Muck quite low. So in this case, I would personally switch to Alolan Muck right away. But let's see what the trainer does. They might also choose to play out this matchup, but this is a easier matchup for the Machamp to play out. So they do win CMP over the Charizard, which is quite nice. It's an easier matchup for the Charizard because they can easily bait as well, and their bait will allow them to get to the Blast Burn before the Machamp will get to the Rock Slide in the one shield. So we'll see whether or not a shield will come up, and we'll see whether or not they go Blast Burn. They do Blast Burn here, so you can do 6, then throw. Okay, gonna catch the Dragon Claw, so making a nice anticipation from the Charizard to catch the move onto the Alolan Muck, expecting the Charizard to go for the Dragon Claw as opposed to the Blast Burn. And as you saw, here, you do not make it to the cross chop. You do not make it to the rock slide beforehand, and this trainer is low enough where the Dragon Claw would threaten the KO. So they make a very nice catch, catching it onto the tankier Alolan Muck, which does allow the Charizard to be a little bit less effective in terms of his damage, because the Dragon Claw would do more damage to the Machamp, and as well would eliminate a bunch of energy that the Machamp had already generated. So let's see what the trainer does. They actually switch out into Umbreon. This is a good matchup for the Alolan Muck. Not an amazing one, for a few reasons. One, because the Alolan Muck has already taken a Dragon Claw, and two, Umbreon is really, really tanky. And even though you have Sludge Wave, it will still allow you to potentially win this matchup, and it's good to beta as well. So the opposing Umbreon trainer actually threw at not the best timing, because they allowed them to sneak an extra poison jab through. So they go foul play. So throwing at good timing, and they did 4 poison jabs. So poison jab is a 2-turn fast move, versus a Snarl from Umbreon is a 3-turn fast move, which is 2 turns being 1 second, and the Snarls being 1.5 seconds. So to optimize the timing, you want to do either 1, 4, or 7 poison jabs, then throw the charge move. So in this case, doing 4 allowed them to do 4 seconds worth of fast moves, and then allow them to throw the charge move in exchange for 3 Snarls, which was 4.5 seconds, which allows them to give them the least amount of turns for throwing the charge move, which is 1 turn. I know it's a lot of math here, but I'm just trying to dissect this match as much as possible. And the Sludge Wave does do quite a bit of damage. And as well, you're in a much more favorable matchup because this trainer likely has Psychic, or they don't know which charge move to throw. So we'll see if they throw the Last Resort, or if they throw another foul play. They do end up throwing another foul play, and gonna throw before the Umbreon reaches another move. We'll see if this Sludge Wave is enough to take it out, and this won't faint the Alolan Muck, and they come back into Charizard and able to get to the Dark Pulse. Maybe the better play would have been to switch straight into Jellicent, but able to take out the Charizard because it was quite a risky play. And they actually have Cresselia in the back, which explains why they did not switch, why they brought in Umbreon, because they felt Umbreon had a better matchup versus versus the Alolan Muck than Cresselia. But with no Last Resort, or they didn't know to throw Last Resort, Cresselia actually would have been the better matchup against as well. I guess there's no guarantee that they had Sludge Wave, so they could have had Acid Spray, tank that spray, then switch out. We're still reasonable. In this case, Jellicent has a positive matchup versus Cresselia because it's able to deal super effective damage with the Hex and Shadow Ball. But the Cresselia is quite tanky and does have access to Grass Knot, which will deal super effective damage to Jellicent's water type moves. And this trainer optimizes their timing through 3 hexes and then through the Shadow Ball, which is basically you want to throw at 1, 3, 5. There's lots of videos online which tell you the optimal timing for 3 versus 2. And this allowed the Jellicent to do 4.5 seconds worth of fast move damage and energy generation while throwing the charge move, what in exchange for 5 seconds or 5 cycle cuts worth of energy and damage, which only allows the opponent to get 1 turn worth of energy and damage in exchange for the charge move, which is the least amount that you can give, except in an event of a CMP tie would be the exception. But you can see Cresselia is quite tanky, but in a very good situation. And okay, you can see that they waited there. I'm not necessarily sure that was necessary there because they could have. I guess it wouldn't really matter if they would have catch there, but it was a very nice play there by the trainer, and has energy banked and gonna go for the rock slide. Obviously, the rock slide is not super effective. The cross chop is super effective, and then as well, it is not the best strategy to do no bubbles on the charge move, because when you do 0 bubbles, it does mean that you only do 25% of what 100% of the damage would be, which would be hitting all the bubbles. And then it scales proportionally depending on the number of bubbles, and different charge moves have different number of bubbles, which explains why you can miss a different number of bubbles and it'll show excellent on some of them and great on other ones, right? So, and they actually hit a couple bubbles here, and they are going to counter down. So this trainer played the matchup very well, and obviously it was a very well played matchup. Very nice reads from the opponent. Obviously, very fortunate that the opponent decided to go Blast Burn instead of Dragon Claw and was successful landing the bait. Okay, this is obviously an extremely favorable matchup. Machamp has a good offensive typing versus Sneasel. Sneasel is ice and dark type, so is double weak to counter. It does have a good matchup versus the Jellicent, since Jellicent will only be able to hit it with neutral damage with the Surfs, and it would resist the Hex and Shadow Ball, and then be able to dish super effective damage with Foul Play, I believe it has. I'm not quite sure. And then Alolan Muck would have a neutral matchup depending if it has Ice Shard, Avalanche, depending on charge moves. But this is a very favorable matchup. Again, you want to evaluate whether or not you need to switch out. In this case, like if it's a really like you don't really have a great answer in the back and Machamp's your only answer, like they come in Registeel, for example, then it's okay to stay in the matchup because you can play out neutrally in the back. They do come into, oh my goodness, Sneasler, okay, and decides to throw the cross chop. In this case, they do have super effect. Okay, this is actually one of the core breakers here because they do have Shadow Claw, typically Aerial Ace and close combat. The Shadow Claws will deal neutral damage to Machamp, super effective damage to Jellicent, and resisted damage to Alolan Muck. But the counter and poison jab from Machamp and Alolan Muck respectively would be resisted, while Jellicent would be able to deal neutral damage, but it's taking super effective damage. So it's kind of an awkward Pokemon to deal with. But Machamp and Alolan Muck have very bad matchups versus Sneasler. But it is very glassy here. So this would still do some damage despite it resisting it. So it's going to switch out right away. And oh, actually, do they have Shadow Claw? Oh, okay, interesting. They're throwing the X Scissor. Oh, typically they have Aerial Ace. I don't know if they typically have Aerial Ace. No, it has Poison Jab. Am I crazy? Looks like it has Poison Jab, which does okay, and it's able to farm all the way down because it does have Poison Jab, and it does have access to Snarl. Okay, gonna throw the Shadow Ball. Surf would actually be better here because it is neutral. The Shadow Balls are resisted. Shadow Ball is quite a strong move. It would do slightly more damage, but at a higher energy cost. So, oh my gosh, they actually have triple Sneasel here. Okay, this is interesting here. This is This is actually a hilarious team. Okay. This is a hilarious team. It actually has access to Ice Shard, which does not do very much damage to the Jellicent. So they will have to throw a charge move. They're not going to be able to farm down. You just let this go. This is actually kind of a hilarious team. Kudos to the trainer here. They actually throw an Ice Punch here. And I would switch out because no point in getting farmed down. And they do actually reach the Ice Punch again. Gonna shield, but this Sneasel, Weavile, I should say, in the back is gonna get absolutely demolished, and tries to make a catch there, but the opponent ended up switching there. So again, um, probably not necessarily. I don't mind the chip and dip, but probably better just to switch out into Jellison and hope to play out that matchup rather than staying in, throwing the cross shot, and taking the damage there. Okay, so Ampharos, this matchup is fairly neutral. Dealing neutral counter and cross chop damage would probably be the optimal play, and likely they have Volt Switch, some variation of Thunder Punch, Brutal Swing, Zap Cannon, Focus Blast. If they have Brutal Swing, Focus Blast, that's probably best case scenario. Or yeah, that's probably best case scenario. Or potentially Zap Cannon. But you want to be able to throw at odd fast moves, in odd number of counters. This is because you have a 2-turn move versus a 4-turn move, so you want to throw in the middle of the 4-turn move. So 2 counters will take the same amount of time as 1 Volt Switch, so you want to avoid throwing on Lyman because it gives them a whole fast move there. But let's see, you definitely want to keep this away from. Okay, they tried to make a catch there, and you can see the immediate swap, recognizing that you need to control switch. So I like this way better, faster swap. The opponent does build up quite a bit of energy, but nothing is that threatening to a Lowland Muck, and you should be able to win this matchup in the even shields. If the Giratina decides to double shield, it can be quite worrisome. And as well, you have to worry about the Ampharos farming the Lowland Muck down afterwards, which would allow it to generate quite a bit of energy. And as well, Machamp is quite glassy. So you want to try to throw on, okay, not going to throw on CMP. I would personally try to throw on CMP because it's on, oh, they actually end up shielding here. So personally, I would shield here, but gonna let it go. Probably gonna look to Hex all the way down. The Ampharos does not have a move yet because it's only at, well, yeah, it does not have the move yet. And we'll see the full Hex down. You want to do 1 Hex, then throw the Shadow Ball or throw the Surf, either one, whatever you want to throw. So the Ampharos does have the move right now because it's at 48 energy. Gonna switch out and do the 1 counter and then throw, which is very good timing there. Really, really nice play. The opponent decides, okay, not the decides, no shield. And gonna throw the Rock Slide on CMP. Was that CMP or is that just the switch timing? Nope. Okay. And not gonna shield. Okay, gonna get access to another Rock Slide, which is actually really huge because now you just need to land a Surf to take out this Cresselia. You definitely no shield this. You need to save at least 1 shield for, oh, they undercharge there potentially. And the matchup is pretty straightforward. You have to shield this, and you have to get. Well, I don't know if you have to get to 2 Surfs here. You have to save the. Oh, that's actually quite bad here. Gonna have to tank it because the Thunder Punch would do more damage. Okay, okay. CMP tie. This is a nice play by the opponent. Gonna have to throw the Surf. We'll see if the Surf is enough to take out the Ampharos. It is. Very nice, and gonna have to race to the Surf and making a very nice play. I think the Thunder Punch does. Actually, not 100% sure what does more, the Thunder Punch or the Grass Knot. That's something I would look up afterwards. The only reason I say that is because um, Grass Knot is a pretty decent move. Thunder Punch is a pretty bad move, but does have same type attack bonus. Ampharos a much higher attack than Cresselia, but I imagine the Thunder Punch would do slightly more than the Dark Pulse, but slightly more than the Grass Knot. So this is where I would go to PV Poke. So we're gonna flip back to the scene here. and I would look up in Ultra League, and I would look up Jellicent. I would look up Ampharos, and I would see the Thunder Punch does 36%. And then I would search Cresselia here. It actually does the same damage. Um, yeah, but yeah, it does the same damage. So it would be very close on which one you should shield. Um, but ultimately, yeah, it would have been very close there. So it's kind of hard to say which one you should shield or not shield, but you do have to tank one of them. And this trainer assessed that the Thunder Punch would do more damage than the Grass Knot, but it's very close. It's not clear just because Grass Knot has a much higher base attack despite having no same type attack bonus from Cresselia, and then as well Cresselia being a much lower attack. So that's something I would personally look up with a student that I would be working with. So anyways, we have lots of battles to go through here. I'm talking in a extensive match. Okay, we go to Regirock. Okay, so when we look at Regirock, Machamp, obviously very favorable matchup. Fighting is super effective against Rock. Their cheapest and most energy efficient move in neutral damage is Stone Edge, which is resisted by Machamp. And then as well, Jellicent has a decent matchup against the Regirock as well because it does have super effective surfs against the Regirock. Alolan Muck would have a poor matchup against the Regirock since Poison Jab and Sludge Wave are resisted and would only be able to hit with neutral for the Dark Ball. So you want to try to avoid that matchup, but as long as you control either Machamp or Jellicent onto the Regirock, you're not too concerned about that particular matchup. They can have access to Zap Cannon, I believe. I might be wrong, which would deal super effective damage to the Jellicent, and the Stone Edges do a pretty decent chunk. They would need 3 Stone Edges to be able to KO the most Jellicents, but you do expect the opponent to switch, but let's see what the opponent does. They do switch out into Venusaur. In this case, Venusaur is one of the core breakers for this team. It does do quite well against the Machamp and Jellicent. So you should look to switch out to a Alolan Muck. I think it's Venusaur. It could be Roserade as well. And is Venusaur not okay? I would switch out sooner rather than later, just because these friends plants do add up, and you will likely need to land the Dark Pulse. Or I guess the Dark Pulse and Farm Down here probably would be the best play. Or you could one shot with Sludge Wave. Let's see what they try to do. So gonna throw just 4 poison jabs after the second frenzy plan, and which is very good timing because it does do throw one fast move before the Venusaur makes it to the third frenzy plan. And able to take out the Venusaur. So it does leave with the optimal amount of energy. They come back in with Regirock. Likely they go for an aggressive farm down. I like the over farm just to throw out the opponent's potential counts. And they do end up shielding, which I don't think is a great play, to be honest. And they do end up throwing the Stone Edge quite quickly here. They actually probably threw exactly when they got to it. And going to come into Machamp and going to be met by the Jellicent. Jellicent's going to meet the Giratina, and the Giratina has a good matchup against the Jellicent since the Shadow Claws are much more effective than the Hexes. But being down a shield, the Jellicent can just go straight Shadow Ball, which the Giratina would survive. And then as well, it would only be a close matchup if the Giratina actually had access to Shadow Sneak or Shadow Force, and if they have access, if they had Dragon Claw and Ancient Power, or they were a single move without a Ghost Charge move, then it's not really that great a matchup against the Jellicent. It's unlikely that they would be able to win. So the only thing I would do there is honestly switch faster to the Alolan Muck to avoid any complications in that matchup, but really good timing by the trainer. All right. We're going to see. Okay. So this is obviously one of the first times they actually lost the lead. in the sets that they send me. So in this case, Jellicent has a very good matchup against Shadow Machamp since it double resists the counter damage, double resists the cross drop damage, and Rock Slide is only neutral, but Rock Slide has no same type of attack bonus and is only an okay move. Jellicent, very tanky, has superior stats to Shadow Machamp when it comes to total stat product, and as well as able to deal neutral damage. The Hex and Shadow Balls would almost one shot. In this case, I would likely say switch to our own Jellicent. You will be one turn behind, which does make up the matchup a little bit tricky, but the Jellicent mirror is very bait dependent. Ultimately, you want to try to align a Jellicent onto the Alolan Muck, which has a good defensive and offensive, or at least charge move advantage. So I do expect the switch out right away. Okay, and it looks like they're staying in. Okay, correctly read that the opponent is okay. This is just a surf though, right? It's just a surf. So gonna fake the pay. Okay, throwing on alignment there. They threw like 3 counters, throwing on alignment. I would probably switch right away here to Jellicent, and does catch the surf there. Very nice. Very nice play. Did throw an alignment, which explains why, if you look here, when they threw, okay, they correctly counted there. You can see here when they throw the, well, let's see if you see here that they actually got a full hex through, which allowed them to generate 3 turns worth more energy and damage in exchange for the charge move. Versus if you did one more counter, they would still get that 3rd hex, but you would get one more counter, which would allow you to do one more counter worth of damage, which doesn't really mean that much, but also generate one more energy of counter. And then they correctly counted and realized that the Jellicent had the surf, and they likely were going to throw right away, making a nice read, switching, and as well getting that hex through. So it worked out quite nicely. And we will see. The Jellicent also shielded because they were fearful of the potential Shadow Ball, no, potential payback, and gonna throw the Shadow Ball into the not Excadrill, Escavalier, and not too fearful of this Escavalier because it does throw double resisted damage. Gonna throw the Shadow Ball. The Surf likely would have been enough, to be honest, and they're actually gonna undercharge, but that does too much damage already. And they come into Wall Rain, and you're gonna do 3, then throw, which is very nice. And now all of a sudden they're in an extremely favorable matchup versus the opponent, because now they have alignment. And gonna throw the Surf. I'm not sure I don't necessarily like the Surf being thrown here, but because now the Wall Rain can farm up to double. And they do have the cross chop. Actually, okay, interesting. The opponent making nice counts there, and they actually end up shielding. I would no shield this because you don't really need it anymore. I'm gonna shield here. Okay, I'm not necessarily sure about the shield here, but switching it right away, anticipating the opponent was gonna switch. This is just an Icicle Spear, but this, I guess, if you get, oh no, there's Earthquake. Okay, all right, okay, miscounted there. So this opponent read that quite well, and this trainer read it quite well. And then gonna throw the Dark Pulse, and this game's over here. I personally wouldn't have shielded the move earlier, but that worked out quite nicely there and able to take it out. The Earthquake also wouldn't have KO'd, but I also lost track of the counts there because the Wall Rain did farm up quite a bit there. So able to finish off that set with a 5-0. And we're gonna take a look at one more battle here since this video is getting quite long. So again, Charizard, we already looked at this previously, is very bait dependent, and we will typically the Charizards will throw Dragon Claws, and they do win CMB again, which is quite handy. We will see whether or not the opponent will shield. They will end up shielding. Gonna shield against the Charizard, and they do end up throwing the Dragon Claw. So gonna try to catch there. They try to catch a second Dragon Claw, but now this opponent will Blast Burn, which will do a tremendous amount of damage to the Alolan Muck. And we'll see how this is gonna play out. They actually come into Cresselia, and gonna throw the Dark Pulse. Very tricky scenario here, since the Okay, I think you gotta let this go here, but could also shield. They do throw the Moonblast, and this is a very tricky situation here, and the trainer is contemplating what to do. Okay, gonna come into Machamp and look to deal some damage with this Rock Slide, but you gotta let this go, right? You gotta farm down. Okay, gonna shield. Maybe bank the move. Oh, they come back into Charizard there, and this opponent makes really nice combo plays here. And honestly, this Charizard is just gonna dish way too much damage to this Jellicent, and gonna throw the Surf. But honestly, this Charizard could also shield. And they end up letting it go, and they do come into Verzion. Verzion being very tough for this particular team. Okay, we'll show one more game here since that was a pretty hard countered game. Okay, so this Pokemon's pretty interesting. Shadow Machamp does have a pretty poor matchup against the Kanto Muck because Muck does resist the counters with his poison typing, is able to do neutral damage, and you will have to rely on Rock Slide. They have access to Thunder Punch, which doesn't do that much damage. It's probably a pretty close zero shield matchup. Probably not the worst matchup, but the Kanto Muck does also outpace the Shadow Machamp to two charge moves. Well, to two neutral charge moves, I should say, since it is only 6 poison jabs for each Thunder Punch up to the fourth one, which then would be 5, but it's not a big deal. Alolan Muck does have a good typing advantage versus Kanto Muck, since Thunder Punches are the main neutral move that they would throw, and then Dark Pulse is a more effective move because of the same type of attack bonus, and is a more effective move in general. And then Jellicent has like kind of a weird matchup against it since it does resist Poison Jab, but would take super effective from Thunder Punch and Dark Pulse, which are the typical moves. So let's see what this trainer does. Maybe they try to catch a Thunder Punch onto. Okay, no. See, as you see, they do outpace, and gonna look to throw the Rock Slide. Looks like they're choosing to stay in this matchup. As you can see, they do quite a bit of damage, and here comes the Wall Rain. And Wall Rain obviously can deal super effective damage with the Earthquake, but we'll see how these two decide to play it out. The Earthquake probably wouldn't KO. Oh, it does KO. That's very bad here, obviously. Gonna wait the clock. Maybe look to try to counter down. Oof, cannot counter down in time. Can counter down after this, obviously. And down a shield, and gonna throw the Rock Slide. We will see if this Muck decides to shield. They do not decide to shield, and they come into Jellicent. Oh man, this is a very bad matchup here. They're gonna throw this is the Seed Bomb, and they're just gonna throw straight Seed Bomb since they're able to deal super effective damage. Gonna throw on alignment, which is not great, but this was a very, very, very tough matchup here. And gonna get Shadow Claw down. Unfortunately, this trainer is getting, when I decide to stop this video here, there's not really too much they could do there. I personally would switch out right away into Muck, and then give yourself a little bit, save the Machamp a little bit more. But this was going to be a really tough team in general. But overall, this trainer played quite well. Their timing was good for the most part. I know this was quite a different video since I did stop and pause it quite a bit. But let me know if you want me to do more of these style type of videos where I break down the analysis really in depth. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. If you like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see everyone in the next video.